Welcome everyone to ARTIVISM, the Power of Art for Social Transformation. Today, our artivist is Nisha Nair. She is the founder and executive director of ArtSparks Foundation at Teachers College. She is a doctoral fellow and a candidate with the Art and Art Education program. She is also an instructor within the program, having co-designed a course in art and community engagement, which she teaches in the fall semesters. Nisha's work in education spans varied settings across continents in both the US and in India. She has served in various capacities from teacher professional development specialist, curriculum developer, researcher, program director, to her present role as executive director. As executive director, Nisha wears many hats, supporting organizational strategy development, program design, human resource development, fundraising, donor relations, just to name a few. At the core of her work in education lies a deep interest in how meaningful art experiences can support the development of a range of human capabilities that in turn propel individual and social transformation, and in how educators can promote such experiences for diverse learners. Her current research explores teachers' creative participation in the making processes of art, viewed through a sociocultural lens, and the position exchanges they facilitate that have implications for prospective transformation and altering teaching practice. Prior to education, Nisha spent 8 years as a multi-award-winning graphic designer, working in the field of marketing communications design, meeting the branding and design needs of diverse clients, such as the Smithsonian Institutions, National Endowments for the Humanities, NASA, and more. Welcome, Nisha Nair.
I always have it on mute. Thank you so much, Aji. Thank you, Carolina. Thank you, Jennifer, for inviting me and allowing me to present and providing this platform as well. So I'm going to take a moment to share my screen, and I can jump right into the presentation and talk us through the slides that I have. So bear with me for a second. Are you able to see this? Yes? Wonderful.
Yep.
Okay. So thank you again. And I just made an addition to the title for today's presentation, which is I'm specifically going to be talking about teachers' creative participation through art. And we're going to look at how that might help facilitate considerations of pedagogical transformations, how that might transform teaching and learning practices within classroom environments. So to set some context, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the Indian education system and some of the associated problems with the existing system. And I think this image that I have here kind of embodies some of the issues that are fairly known within the Indian context. One is this very top-down hierarchical system of education. Oftentimes, decisions on what to teach are not necessarily in the teacher's hands, but they are developed at the policy level and funneled down to the teachers, with teachers having very little agency to kind of do what they need to do within the classroom settings. Neither are they provided with the training and development in order to be able to facilitate the kinds of learning that could be transformative within classroom settings. The instruction is very didactic, again, because the teachers are merely seen as a conduit for delivering textbook content. So the delivery of the content within the classroom settings, this, again, image really embodies it. Teachers standing in front of the classroom, delivering the content in a very kind of didactic manner, children very passively receiving it and not necessarily engaged in the process. The main method of delivering the content is through the use of the textbook. And you'll see the walls are devoid of any teaching learning materials. The primary, again, delivery mechanism, besides the textbook is the Blackboard. So just kind of giving a sense of what that environment looks like as well. This is an example of a classroom within a government school, and the government schools are schools that serve children from some of the most underserved communities. India has different tiers of schooling, and depending on which socioeconomic bracket that you fall under, you have access to certain kinds of school opportunities. And most of these children whose parents are day wage laborers earning anywhere from $1 to $2 a day within the communities doing the odd work. This is the school that they have access to, because this is the school that's free to them, and therefore they can access it without having to pay tuition. Promotion of rote learning is again is indicative of this particular space. So a lot of the content again is delivered in a manner where the children are merely memorizing as opposed to engaging critically with the content. And in this environment, having just painted that picture, the positionality of the arts in relation to other subjects, you will very rarely find the arts. Maybe 5% of the government schools in India, of which there are many, have any form of the arts or art instruction. And part of that is, again, the kind of view of the positionality of the arts in relation to other subjects, the view of the value of the arts in relation to subjects such as math and science. The arts are often seen as a frill, not necessarily needed in order to educate children within school environments. So I kind of share that first to lay some context, and also therefore talk about some of the new policy recommendations, given that this is what the schools look like. The latest series of policy documents that have come out talk a lot about things that are very different from what we saw in the first image. We're seeing, for example, a lot of conversations around child and learner-centered learning. There's a need to give primacy to children's experiences, as that quote states. We see a lot around creativity development, a call for creativity development, this recognition that creativity is a skill that's necessary for the future, and therefore the need to kind of integrate that into the curriculum. There's also now a lot of conversation around the role of the arts in education. The latest policy document that came out in 2020 states that the arts in education, as you can see in that last quote, when students share their ideas and feelings through a variety of art forms, they recognize strengths and challenges. And so this notion that the arts can develop empathy in students, can build cooperation, can create the circumstances necessary for peaceful coexistence, but also the kind of the capacities that children might develop through the arts that can be really important and fruitful in the context of their learning. So while the policy recommendations of late are kind of featuring these kinds of conversations, we continue to, however, see classrooms that look like this, which is, again, teacher in front of the classroom delivering content. And the image on the right is kind of indicative of what teacher training looks like as well. And so the teacher training that most of these teachers receive is also of a very didactic nature. It's instruction being delivered to them in a manner where they don't have the capacity to internalize some of these concepts like child-centered learning, considering that their own education was not child-centered. And so it's sometimes a pretty big leap to make when you haven't experienced it yourself. And so oftentimes, again, what we see is a disconnect between policy recommendations and the implementation of the programs within schools and the kind of way teaching and learning occurs within the schools. The impediments to achieving reform recommendations, and I'll just kind of share there are many impediments, but the key impediment that I'll be talking about today is social cultural norms and beliefs within the settings that these schools are situated within, but also within the context of the larger Indian ecosystem. These are norms and beliefs that kind of impede the capacity to embrace child-centered practices. For example, the notion that the child is an empty vessel to be filled with knowledge, as Paulo Freire talked about, the banking system of education, and the notion that adults know better and children don't know much, and therefore the children need to listen. That's a deeply rooted social cultural norm that often impedes the capacity to really integrate child-centeredness and learner-centeredness into the classroom. There's also kind of impediments to kind of achieving creativity or kind of creating the circumstances to develop creativity within the classroom. Because again, if there's a notion that the teacher knows best, the instruction is often didactic, which means that it restricts children's capacity to come up with their own ideas within the classroom. And oftentimes things are delivered in a very step-by-step manner, and therefore it kind of obstructs the children's capacity to think creatively and imaginatively for themselves. There's also kind of an issue around the role of arts in education that's kind of rooted in these kind of social cultural norms. For example, a norm that a general belief in the environment that the sciences are more important than the arts, and that the humanities does not have much to offer, or the humanities are things that don't contend with the important things that like the growth of the economy, and therefore the need for the sciences and the need for math, etc., kind of impedes the capacity to implement the arts within these environments. So I just wanted to kind of set that context, because I think it's important to kind of consider as we kind of talk about the work that ArtSparks Foundation does. And so I'll kind of go through just a bit about what it is that we do as an organization. As you mentioned, Aji, I am the founder of this nonprofit organization. It is an 8-year-old organization at this point of time. We serve anywhere from about 2,200 to 3,000 children directly during any given school year. We work predominantly with children from the most underserved communities, attending these local government schools. And while we directly work with about 2,200 to 3,000 children in any given school year, again, depending on the enrollment at a school, we also have a professional development arm of the work that we do, where we develop the capacities of nonprofit organizations across the country. We so far have engaged about 72 organizations, and through them and through our capacity building of those organizations, we serve tens of thousands more children across the country as well. And our focus is, and our mission is, to develop what we call 21st century learning and life skills in the children. And these skills are, for us, we've defined them as problem solving, flexible thinking, the capacity to experiment and investigate, and come up with discover various possibilities, risk-taking, close observation, perseverance, collaboration, and communication. These skills that we believe are, in today's day and age, in this very complex kind of environment that we exist in, are more important than basic literacy and numeracy, and that they are intrinsically important to kind of navigate the complexities of the world that we live in. And so in focusing on these skills and attitudes, we kind of look at, and I'll just kind of give a little bit of a glimpse into kind of the setup within the schools as well. So we set up something called the Creative Learning Labs within these schools that we're situated within. It's a dedicated space within the schools where the children have access to this kind of learning. It's not just visually kind of wonderful to look at, but it's also the kind of learning that occurs within the space. And you might want to compare and contrast this with the images that we saw early on. It's vibrant. The kind of work that's being done is hands-on, experiential, inquiry-based. There's a lot of materiality. There's a lot of students kind of negotiating with each other, collaborating. So the kind of work that happens within the space itself is kind of diametrically different from the kind of context that it's situated within. Here are just a couple of other images as well. And so we recognize that the kind of work that's happening in this space is the kind of work that we really, and the kind of learning that should really be happening for all children. But I want to be really honest in saying that in kind of coming into this space and doing this work, it was not enough for us to have a lofty vision and a lofty mission about bringing in, engaged forms of learning and, bringing in this vibrant kind of tool that is the arts that's going to suddenly transform the kind of learning that happens within the space. It would have been naive for us to have thought that just bringing in the arts into the space was going to automatically transform this particular kind of context that we were talking about. For us, we really had to understand the social cultural context within which we were situated and the various different, again, beliefs that I had mentioned earlier on that were at play. And we needed to recognize and attend to those beliefs as well in order to be able to kind of transform the learning that happens within the space. And by that, I mean, we had to attend to the beliefs of those who are going to teach this particular program, because again, we're hiring people who come in from these communities in order to deliver this program. It's important for them to transition out of some of their kind of ways of thinking and kind of encounter perspective transformations themselves in order to be able to kind of deliver the kind of program that we wished for them to deliver. And so in that context, for us, the people that we are kind of training in order to be and developing their capacities are our women facilitators. These are women who we hire from the communities where we're situated. These are women, again, who've been marginalized by their own experiences. These are women whose own lived experiences, whether it was their schooling, the kind of teaching and learning that they were exposed to, their positionality within society, the control that's often exercised over them in a highly patriarchal kind of society that they're positioned within, their lack of voice. All of those things were things that were going to be needed to be negotiated with. We needed to be able to address those in order for them to be able to come into this space and really be able to engage with the children in a manner that was transformative. And so that was something that we really kind of had to think about. I also wanted to just quickly say that we were really keen on working with these women too, because we recognized that their connection to the community was an asset, the local communities. We also recognize that there's a lot of untapped potential within these communities, because again, these women and women such as them don't often get access to opportunities. And if we could find them and we could provide them with an opportunity, we were really interested in that. And we were really interested in exploring this idea of empowering women from local communities to lead change within their communities. So I think that was also one of the reasons why we gravitated towards working with this group in delivering our program, as opposed to working with artists. These were not artists. They were not necessarily practicing artists. They were just women from the community who had a desire to be able to do something, but just had never received the opportunity in order to be able to move forward and do things. So I'm going to use an example, and again, I'll try and see. I have one eye on the time, and I'm going to try and see if I can be as succinct as possible. But I'm going to use this example to kind of share a little bit about how ArtSparks has been exploring the role of the women's own creative participation in the making processes of art in facilitating perspective transformation. And I'm going to use this example of a recent project that was completed that Raji, you and I have talked about. And this was in response to a curatorial call by an organization here in New York City called the South Asian Women's Creative Collective. And they had a open call for an exhibition called Social Memory Sites of Remembrance. A few of our women facilitators responded to this open call and kind of worked collaboratively on a piece that they submitted and got featured in this particular exhibition in Chelsea. And I'm going to use this as an example again to talk about ArtSparks' approach to developing its women facilitators and kind of giving them the transformative experience. And again, I'd kind of say, compare this to what teacher education often looks like within these contexts, which is, again, the delivery of static knowledge to be able to take forward and execute within the spaces that one goes to teach within. So as part of the process, one major aspect of the process was the women coming together, sharing their stories regarding their lived experiences, recognizing kind of shared experiences that they've had amidst them, but also recognizing experiences that were diverse. They began to build a strong sense of support and solidarity as they came together. They started questioning internalized assumptions, things that they had taken for granted. Maybe the notion that a woman's place is just at home, the notion that a girl's education is not as important as this quote mentions, because at the end of the day, her father, her brother, or her husband is going to take care of her, and therefore it's not necessarily important to educate her. They started to have those conversations and begin to start challenging those assumptions that maybe they've internalized and have never really questioned before. They also started kind of raising one another's consciousness in the process, because maybe, again, somebody has a different way of thinking about something, and therefore started to challenge one another a bit as well. And they also started reimagining possibilities in the process of this kind of experience. So in one way, we can say that this particular experience of immersing themselves in the process and kind of making art and kind of experiencing the art making process, they began to recognize that their lived experiences can be a site for powerful learning, that instead of what tends to happen within the school environments, rather than recognizing children as coming in with experiences that can be tapped into and that can be valued, very oftentimes the assumption is that you're going to be imposing upon them certain kinds of learnings that they need to take away. In this process, the women themselves began to experience the value in kind of looking at lived experience and how that could be a powerful kind of modality to tap into in order to be able to deepen learning. The other aspect that I'll speak about is that in developing their ideas, they drew inspiration from each other. They also drew inspiration from their environment. As this quote suggests, there's a lot of things in the environment that triggered ideas as well. Ideas were generated through that process. The materials themselves played a role in idea development and generation. The materials, for example, evoked certain memories for the women. It offered certain affordances, so certain materials allowed them to do certain things. It also presented certain constraints, so there were certain things that the materials did not allow them to do. And so in a way, the materials exercised agency in the process. And so what this kind of notion of idea development was not solely in the heads and in the minds of an individual, but it was a process, kind of a collaborative, participatory process. The women began to recognize that collaboration and the participatory nature of creativity kind of breaks away this notion that some people are creative and others are not, which is oftentimes what sometimes happens in the classroom. The notion that some children have creativity and are naturally inclined to creative endeavors, while others are not. and kind of broke away from those assumptions by, again, experiencing that particular process. And then the third aspect that was kind of really salient as they worked, as they were creating their artwork, they began to generate multiple ideas to solve the artistic problem that was presented to them. They not only physically collaborated while constructing the piece, but they also kind of negotiated varied perspectives to come to a consensus, because the women were collaborating on this piece. They worked on these 4 component parts, but it had to come together. It had to work with each other. There needed to be resonance amongst the piece. They tested out the material possibilities, what the material can and cannot do for them. They dealt with the ambiguity associated with making, that oftentimes you might have some thoughts in mind, but how it actually materializes is something completely different. And there is a level of ambiguity associated with that and uncertainty. And they confronted and negotiated challenges that they encountered along the way as well. All of this revealed to the women that the depth of focusing on the artistic process is far more important than focusing on the artistic product. And that too was a learning that could be associated with how these kinds of processes materialize within the classroom environment with children. The ability to move away from a product orientation. Today, we're all going to create versions of Van Gogh's painting, to a process orientation, which is about discovering the possibilities and the affordances and constraints of the material, for example, in order to be able to create something that's quite profound. So all of these learnings kind of came together. If I could bring them all together, it's really about helping, in this particular case, the teacher move from the notion of teacher to the notion of facilitator, and the notion of a lifelong learner as well. And what happens when you transform a group of individuals who are set out to teach to begin to look at themselves as facilitators and learners in the process, and kind of engage children as such as well. So I'm going to share just kind of the tail end of this presentation. It's just going to share how the learnings from the kind of immersions that our women facilitators have, how that translates into the work that they end up doing with the children. So Project Empower is a project that we've created at the organization specifically for the girl child. It is a project that brings together girls from the various schools that we work within, creating a safe and brave space for the girls to come together, to have conversations around their hopes and their aspirations, but also the things that they have to negotiate in terms of the challenges that they encounter, and kind of give them this kind of creative space where the art and materials and medium, etc., offers them an opportunity to imagine a better future and possibilities for themselves and for other girls as well. And so through the women's own kind of process, they began to understand again that ideas don't develop in vacuum, but they develop through conversations with others, that the children have, again, those wonderful lived experiences of their own that they can bring forward and they can talk about and discuss. And so you see a difference, again, just in terms of the facilitator in blue on the lower left corner, her position compared to a teacher standing in front of the classroom, seated with the girls, having conversations with the girls, listening to them more than speaking to them, hearing the stories that they have to share. The girls themselves are given that opportunity to collaborate and share and come to kind of a shared understanding, but also respect the differences that exist within their groups. Materiality played into the work that the girls were doing as well. So the women recognized through their own immersions how the materials can often have agency, as I spoke about earlier, and how through the materials can evoke ideas and can bring things to the surface. And so the same kinds of experiences the girls also then kind of experience, which is the ability to navigate and negotiate the materials. the idea that, again, ideas don't develop in vacuum mean that collaboration is really celebrated, the girls coming together, working in support of one another as opposed to in competition with one another, which sometimes tends to happen within the regular classroom, kind of elevating, working in conjunction with each other. So a lot of how they work within their own kind of experiences with the artistic process, how that kind of funnels over to their work with the girls, and how they are able to kind of apply a lot of things that they've internalized to their own immersive experiences when they work with the girls. And so just kind of end with a few slides of the 9-foot murals that the girls ended up creating, but recognizing in all of these pictures, you very rarely see the facilitator in the picture, because again, the girls are really taking ownership over their own learning. They're the ones who are kind of being empowered in this process of kind of engaging with the arts, truly having a transformative experience. And so this recognition again that in order to be able to implement such programs, there is a need to be able to also kind of recognize the kind of transitions that need to occur for those that teach, and the kind of recognition of what the environment that one is working with, that one cannot be setting that aside and walking into spaces with lofty visions to create change when there might be certain forces that work against it, and therefore the necessity to be able to also address those aspects. So I think that might be my last slide, and I'm going.
मेरा नाम दिलकश कौसर है। मैं आर्ट्सपार्क फाउंडेशन क्रिएटिव लर्निंग लैब में फैसिलिटेटर का काम करती हूँ इन कदरनहल्ली गवर्नमेंट स्कूल। कदरनहल्ली एक छोटा सा क्राउडेड एरिया है बेंगलुरु में, जहाँ पे हमारी स्कूल है। मेरा नाम दिलकश कौसर है। मैं आर्ट्सपार्क फाउंडेशन क्रिएटिव लर्निंग लैब में फैसिलिटेटर का काम करती हूँ इन कदरनहल्ली गवर्नमेंट स्कूल। कदरनहल्ली एक छोटा सा क्राउडेड एरिया है बेंगलुरु में, जहाँ पे हमारी स्कूल है। मैं थोड़ी मोटी थी बचपन में। स्कूल्स में लड़के लोग मेरे से ज़्यादा मिलते नहीं रहते। मोटी चबी थी तो मेरे से कोई बात नहीं करते। घर में भी दादी लोग बोलते, घर से भी ऐसा ही ट्रीटमेंट मिला, स्कूल्स में भी ऐसा मिला। तो फ्रेंड्स ऐसा वो माइंड में एक ये पड़ गया माइंड सेट, ओ मैं मोटी हूँ इसलिए सब लोग मुझे नहीं बात करते। सब लोग थे बट आई वॉज नॉलेज नहीं थी मुझे, तो इसे कैसा जाना है मुझे स्टेप्स पता नहीं था। मंजिल है, वो मंजिल को जाने के लिए रास्ता कैसा जाना है वो नहीं पता था। तो वो चीज़ मुझे कहाँ से भी नहीं मिली। कभी मुझे मैं कौन हूँ करके मुझे पता ही नहीं चला। आर्ट्सपार्क ज्वाइन होने के बाद मेरी लाइफ ही चेंज हो गई।
What ArtSparks essentially does is we work with local government schools, schools that do not have access to the arts at all. We work with the school and we set up this space called the Creative Learning Labs.
At ArtSparks, we talk about majorly 8 skills that children get developed, right? Like the close observation, perseverance, investigation, problem solving, decision making, even communication, collaboration. So there's a famous quote that we should teach children how to think but not what to think. Like something similar happens in this space as well, where our facilitators, when they come into the lab, they ask questions about their children's ideas, their opinions about anything, be it a community, be it about themselves, their feelings, their thoughts, all of those things. So that in itself adds a lot, and then gives children a sense of belonging in the first place, right? Like that environment in itself gives a sense of belonging, that this space is somewhere that I can be myself. It's so much more enriching. It's so much more so much engaging, so much it just motivates them. Like it's a space where they feel interested about, if they're curious about. And then they're also interacting with the facilitators again, who are who do not judge, who respect, and then who are where they allow children to take responsibility for themselves. Children come up with amazing, beautiful ideas, but for them to share it openly, what they need is that trust between them, and say, oh, okay, I can talk to this person. I can, in a group of 20 children, amongst the group, I can raise my hand and then speak up. So that's the kind of confidence also that gets developed with these things.
In our CLL labs, we do have these women facilitators that we bring in from within the community, and they learn from us, they get trained to work with the children, and then they are imparting these art-based interventions in that space. So what's beautiful about this whole thing is just the children are obviously benefiting because these women have built the right attitudes and they're doing this art-based interventions, but there's a two-way thing, right? These women also normally not looked at as anyone in their communities. The women come from very humble backgrounds, often with very little education. Sometimes never had an opportunity to work in their lives, but suddenly now they get this wonderful opportunity to come and work in this space, and they get this beautiful boost of self-esteem, like I am actually contributing something, and especially in the education field.
पहले मुझे पता नहीं था कौन हूँ मैं, तो अभी मैं सब समझ रही हूँ. दिलकश कौन है? मदर है, हाउसवाइफ है, या छोटी बचपन में उसके ऊपर जो माइंडसेट था, आज जो दिलकश है, कॉन्फिडेंट है. फैमिली में भी चेंजेस हुआ है, रिलेशन में भी चेंजेस हुआ है, और मेरे बच्चे जो स्कूल्स में पढ़ रहे हैं वो पेरेंट्स की इतनी रेस्पेक्ट है, वही बहुत बड़ी चेंज है हमारी लाइफ में.
ಆರ್ಟ್ಸ್ಪಾಕ್ ಅಂತಕ್ಕಂಥದ್ದು ನಮಗೆ ಇದು 7ನೇ ವರ್ಷ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ನಮಗೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಮಕ್ಕಳಲ್ಲಿ ತುಂಬ ಬದಲಾವಣೆಗಳನ್ನು ನಾನು ಕಾಣ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. ಏಕೆಂದರೆ ಮೊದಲಿಗೂ ಈಗೂ ತುಂಬ ವ್ಯತ್ಯಾಸಗಳನ್ನು ಕಾಣ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇವೆ. ಆರ್ಟ್ಸ್ಪಾಕ್ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಆ ಪಿರಿಯಡ್ ಇದೆ ಅಂದ ತಕ್ಷಣ ಆ ದಿನ ಅವರು ತಪ್ಪಿಸ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋಕ್ಕೆ ಇಷ್ಟನೇ ಪಡಲ್ಲ. ಕ್ಲಾಸ್ಗಳಿಗೆಲ್ಲ ತುಂಬ ರೆಗ್ಯುಲರ್ ಆಗಿ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಮತ್ತು ಅಟೆಂಡೆನ್ಸ್ ವೈಸು ಮತ್ತು ನಮ್ಮ ಅಡ್ಮಿಷನ್ ವೈಸು ಸಹ ನಮಗೆ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ದಾಖಲಾತಿಗಳನ್ನು ನಾವು ಕಂಡಿದ್ದೇವೆ. ಮತ್ತು ಮಕ್ಕಳಲ್ಲಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಮಕ್ಕಳು ಡ್ರಾಪ್ಔಟ್ಸ್ ಇರ್ತಿದ್ರು. ಮೊದಲು ಒಂದು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ವರ್ಷ ಬಂದು 4ನೇ ಕ್ಲಾಸ್ 5ನೇ ಕ್ಲಾಸ್ ಆದಮೇಲೆ ಡ್ರಾಪ್ಔಟ್, ಸ್ಕೂಲಿಗೆ ಬರದೇ ಆಗೋದು, ಅಥವಾ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಲ್ಯಾಕ್ ಆಫ್ ಇಂಟ್ರೆಸ್ಟಿಂದನೋ ಏನೋ ಒಂದು ರೀಸನಿಂದ ಶಾಲೆ ಬಿಟ್ಬಿಡ್ತಿದ್ರು. ಬಟ್ ಈಗ ನಾನು 4-5 ವರ್ಷದಿಂದ 5 ವರ್ಷದಿಂದ ಗಮನಿಸ್ತಾ ಇರೋದೇನೆಂದರೆ ಡ್ರಾಪ್ಔಟ್ಸ್ ರೇಟ್ ನಮಗೆ ತುಂಬ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಆಗ್ತಿದೆ. ಇದನ್ನು ಕರೆದು ಪೇರೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಜೊತೆಲಿ ಆರ್ಟ್ಸ್ಪಾಕ್ದ ನಾವು ಬೇರೆ ಈ ಥರ ಆರ್ಟ್ಸ್ಪಾಕ್ದು ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ ಸಾಲ್ವಿಂಗ್ದು ಸ್ಕಿಲ್ಸ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಎಲ್ಲ ಇಂಟ್ರೊಡ್ಯೂಸ್ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಟ್ಟಾಗ, ಓ ನಮ್ಮ ಮಕ್ಕಳು ಇದನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಕಲಿತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರಾ, ಓ ಇದನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಬಂದು ಮನೇಲಿ ಹೇಳ್ತಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಅನ್ನೋಂಥದ್ದು ಒಂದು ಹೊಸದನ್ನು ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು.
We envision education to be far different from what it is today, or it has been all these decades in the Indian context, and all of that transformation in education becoming a lot more robust and child-centric and so on and so forth, all through the medium of arts and design. So that's the primary goal, is to change the way we teach children, change the way children learn in a space. The organization of course does this through the arts, because we know that the arts is a powerful tool to be able to bring about these changes in education. Back to that question, why these skills? Because I think it can transform everything around us. It can transform not only just the learning spaces that we are in, but it can transform society. If each child builds those skills, and as they grow, magic can happen, I guess, in some ways. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. This was so beautiful. I have a lot to say, but before we go to discussion and questions, thank you for being our artist for today. Just a reminder, next Monday, May 1st, commences the Wearable Art for a Purpose exhibition at Adelphi University's Performing Arts Center at the Garden City University campus. In addition, the same day at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time, Rowan McKiernan will present her experience of how I became an artivist. For more information on this and all of the series past and upcoming events, please visit delphi.edu/artivism. You can find our YouTube videos of past events on our YouTube channel, Artivism, again, for the number 4 Shared Humanity, the same for Facebook and Instagram. But if anybody would like to present, if you'd like to connect with us, you can email us at artivism@adelphi.edu. This was such a beautiful presentation. I think what stays in my mind were the beginning images of the classroom with the children in line, you know, the walls that had nothing on them, all with the same color, you know, muted colored uniforms, and then how it all just exploded with color, the walls, the clothing, the fabrics, you know, everything that they were creating. It's just so beautiful. The teacher getting down in a circle, working in a circle. I think actually that's how a classroom should be. They should be in circles, not rows, so we can each see each other and connect better. Very beautiful. Carolina, anything before I continue?
Well, first of all, thank you. I echo Professor Archie's comments of thanking you for this opportunity and for the marvelous work that you're doing with your organization. One kind of like comment / question that comes to mind is, given what you mentioned at the beginning, right, with that we have to work together and see it, what are their social beliefs, how do you how does the government react to your organization? Because I can tell, like Professor Arjun was saying, all these children and their parents and everyone involved in this process now has a different way of thinking from what potentially is the norm or has been the norm, right? And you know, what comes to mind is like, how is the government reacting to this?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I think that's an incredibly important question. So major aspect of the work that we also do is stakeholder engagement. And the stakeholder is, you know, pretty diverse, from parents. We do a lot of work with the parents, a lot of, again, immersive experiences for the parents to kind of build their understanding. We do it with teachers, classroom teachers within the schools that we're situated within, school administrators as well, and then the local government officials associated with the Department of Education. And so in the context of India, that's the cluster resource person, the block education officer, all of these different departments that exist in order to be able to provide them with a continuous kind of understanding, but again, in a manner that engages. One of the things that we recognized early on in the process, and that is included with our facilitators, is that telling, no matter how eloquently one might try to kind of convey, doesn't oftentimes kind of change, again, kind of rock solid beliefs about what education should look like and what it should be. And so it's not always the most effective way. It might seem like the quickest way to kind of get across the message, but it isn't oftentimes the most effective. And so that's when we realize that there needs to be kind of experiential kind of ways of conveying what it is that we're trying to convey. And so oftentimes we run workshops that are immersive workshops where one has, again, a kind of a different experience. And then when that different experience occurs, using Mesereau's term, there is a kind of a disruption in a traditional way of kind of thinking about something, right? And then they begin to start questioning certain assumptions that they had about the teaching and learning process. They begin to recognize, so we ran a workshop for educators where we positioned them with children. I'll just give one concrete example. And the workshop was both the educators as well as the children working on projects individually, but in this kind of setting where they could also share ideas, etc. And there was a science teacher who kept talking about this one boy in the group as a slow learner. She kept using that term. He's a slow learner, he's a slow learner, until the point where she met with a roadblock as she was constructing her sculpture. And he came in to help her out and then was able to resolve the challenge that she was unable to resolve. And that laid the foundation for a conversation where she came to us at the end of the workshop and said, I've always thought he was a slow learner. I am baffled at the fact that he knows so much and he was able to help me out. And so you're able to kind of, again, change your views when you actually encounter something that kind of shakes your belief system, and it makes you start questioning these assumptions that you internalize. So there's a lot of that work that occurs as well, that we take a lot of time and effort in our spaces, but it is we think it's of tremendous value. And we find ourselves having to do it again and again, because just doing it once is not enough either.
And then also that breakthrough that they feel when they realize it's the process of creating. You have to get that idea that we all have in our head. This is what my piece should look like at the end. This is what my piece will have to look like at the end. It never does. It never comes out the way you imagine it. So once you kind of let that go and have an idea of what you would like maybe, and enjoy the process, the result is always better. And even if it isn't, the process is what matters. And I mean, the joy on the faces of, the women, the children in those photographs is just priceless. Beautiful.
No, absolutely. We definitely uphold the process over the product as an organization as well, and constantly kind of reiterate the value of that. And we also we take a very constructivist approach to kind of engaging the children in the process. So everything's scaffolded, and so we've never done a project that is less than about 6 weeks long, because again, learning occurs through that process, not just as a one-off. Oh, thank you. Yes, celebrating the process, absolutely.
Yes. Any other questions or comments?
I have a follow-up before
the
others think about their comments and questions. It will be, if you were to summarize more or less, I know, right, it's very contextual, but overall, let's say ideally, right, some best practices. Say, because yes, what I just said, right, contextually, but yet it seems that in other parts of the world, this is a set system, right? And I have seen this model in various other sections of the world. It's not only particular to India. But what I'm saying is, if you could, from your experience and your organization, right, what could be best practices apart from, knowing the context, their beliefs, more or less from an administrator? Like, let's say if I want to come in and I start a similar model, say in Latin America, right? What would be, from your experience, some of the key components to those best practices for, let's say, this new organization to come and start a similar idea in Latin America, for example?
Yeah, I think that, the two that you've covered are really kind of important, which is, again, know your context and kind of research the context and study the context, and then certainly, what are the what are some of the norms and practices in play within that context. But I would say that for us, I think that there's a tremendous kind of, as the presentation also attests to, a tremendous belief in the fact that you need to invest in the development of those that teach. And oftentimes, and that holds true even when I was an administrator in New York City, running a program as a program director here, and going into public schools. My program here was in 78 public schools. So I was in and out of the schools across the 5 boroughs. You'd oftentimes encounter teachers whose espoused values and their enacted values were quite different. So they would say something, I believe in X, Y, and Z, and then you would see something different being implemented. And oftentimes that's because just the way, we kind of internalize certain things that we encounter along the way, concepts that we internalize, but then it's always filtered through the way we see the world. And then we kind of deliver it and shift it a bit and change it around, that it turns out to be something completely different. So I think that in the context of whether it's in India or wherever else, and as you mentioned, Kathleen, a lot of these are, things that you will see across the globe. I think that the one major thing is the recognition and the need to invest in the development of those that are going to be implementing the program, that there's no quick and easy way around that particular process. I think that, and so that as an administrator, I think that's the most important thing. Everything else then follows suit, right? The curriculum and all of that. We also took a stance where we said, let's switch things around. Instead of teachers lacking agency, what happens when you give them agency, right? Like what happens when you flip the script of, instead of things flowing from top down, the decisions are being made by the organizational head and the leadership team, and then funnel down to the bottom. What happens when you bring in the women in this particular case who normally don't have a voice and are normally not listened to, and so on and so forth, and engage them in that kind of process and give them opportunities to create their own ideas. Even this particular project emanated from them. In terms of what it is that they wish to do, etc., as opposed to here's what you're going to do, and now go out and set out to do this. So I think that there's also a little bit of that. For us, it's a continuous learning process as well, to be able to say as an organization, we're a learning organization. And everybody in this organization, including myself, is constantly learning and kind of going and experimenting and testing out and talking and discussing. So I think maybe these are some of the things that I might share. Let me pause.
And in the chat, it says, so understanding and listening to each context is vital then, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. I think that because there's so many assumptions, even as somebody who I spent a significant part of my early years in India. I grew up in India predominantly, with the exception of a brief stint in the UK. And so even as, a person who is from the country, India is a pretty diverse country, and from state to state there are variances, from community to community. I had earlier on mentioned my lived experiences as a woman of privilege versus the experiences of some of the women that we work with who come from very, underserved communities. Is distinctly different. That it would be presumptuous for me or anyone else to think that we know the context really well and that we know what's best for the context. We need to be able to go in with the understanding of what can we discover when we're there. Someday, I'm hoping that we all get to kind of interact in person.
Yeah, it's just, may I say something?
Please go ahead.
It's so nice to, you've got an amazing empathy with, and the way you describe it, it's so humble, but also so confident, which is quite, and the kids need that, they need confidence, but they need to see that you are questioning all the time as much as they do. So that gives them extra confidence. And why can't you pick up the plane and we'll all meet? That's so frustrating that we're so hard.
Oh, thank you so much. You're very kind. Thank you.
No, it's just, it's nice that you're not lecturing to us. It's it's your way of, if you're talking the same way to the kids, then it seems to me it's, that's why the empowerment comes. So whether come all to India, or are you in India now, or where are you?
I'm actually in New York City right now. I shuttle back. Right. So, but you're welcome to come to either place. I'll meet you at wherever you are, wherever you decide to come.
Well, anyway, it's.
Thank you so much.
much. It's, yeah, great.
Thank you.
Carolina?
Do we have any other comments, suggestions, questions from the audience members? Well, I'd like to take a moment to give a shout out to Ms. Jennifer Govan from Gottesman Libraries Teachers College at Columbia University, one of our ARTIVISM sponsors. Thank you, Ms. Govan, for this opportunity. Like Ms. Nair said, you know, opportunity is also key for all this work. And thanks to you, all this that has been going on now for a couple of semesters, it grew. Thank you. Also, shout out to Professor Arji, right? She's doing great as the MC of the event. And to all of you zooming in from around the world, thank you for staying up late, waking up early to be part of this conversation. Here in ARTIVISM, we have a tradition of closing the events with a key takeaway for action, right? Because our mission is to nurture that change for a more dignified and meaningful coexistence. What will be your key takeaway that you'd like to leave us with today?
Is that posed to me?
Yes, yes, it's for you, our presenter, yes.
So I genuinely, again, I think that, I'd like to assume that, like I mentioned, I too am continuously learning and growing through this process. But I think that, again, you know, there's something so profoundly wonderful. My passion is definitely in teacher development. And I think there's something really profound when we're working with individuals and who, you know, and we're kind of building their capacity to go out there and engage with children. And so I think that for me, I think it's also kind of recognizing, I think we've seen teaching teachers as like a cognitive activity that's all about, again, delivering content, knowledge to them. But I think there's something to be said about how the arts can be used in kind of developing the capacity of teachers, that there's something powerful in kind of immersing in the process. And so maybe I might encourage others to kind of consider that as a possibility to developing a number of these skills and attitudes, even when developing teachers who are not going to go out and teach the arts. I think that the arts have something profound to offer. So that's my 2 cents.
I would like to suggest or possibly propose something here. At ARTIVISM, we have several roundtable events. Maybe we could think about having a little roundtable event and invite some of the women you work with in India, not just the teachers, but maybe 1 or 2 of the parents, 1 or 2 of the students, and have us on this end and from all over the world. We have people zooming in from all over, hear from them directly, giving them a voice.
Yeah. That would be wonderful.
I would love it. And, you know, show us their work.
Yeah.
You said, you know, some of their work was accepted at a gallery here, giving them this platform to also speak for themselves and show their work, and also invite them to submit a poster design for the fall. We'll email you about that as well.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. I was also going to say that I'll share with RJU as well as Carolina some videos of
please,
of our women that might be interesting for you to also kind of take a look at and share with anyone else also, where they're kind of just a little bit where you'll hear their voices too, and kind of
and see maybe they would like to come on to ARTIVISM and speak, present.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah.
I know that we would jump on that opportunity.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you to Jennifer Govan from Gottesman Libraries Teachers College at Columbia University. Carolina thanked you earlier. I thank you now. Thank you to Dr. Stephanie Lake, Criminal Justice Director at Adelphi University, and Sing for Hope. our sponsors. Thank you everyone for being here today. We hope to see you again soon. Caroline, anything else before we close? I think
definitely. Yes, I
yes.
think Ms. Brasso has a comment or
Yes.
question.
I see the
Go.
hand.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
also, I wanted to acknowledge Wendy and Powell put in the chat that we each learn from our own lens, and it is important to adopt and adapt. Very
That's right.
important. Absolutely. Yes.
No, it's not a question, but it's just again to praise you that just giving a voice, it doesn't matter what they do, but giving a voice to this children and also making them, you could be a bad student, but what does this mean through this art thing? And also the intuition and the warmth, because in art, you can't pre-plan, things happen. So this idea, they need to be sort of ready for any development is great in terms of building up their confidence and generally. And I think it should be like an army, it should be compulsory, but it doesn't happen. And sadly, all the teachers, at least from the sides I am, all they care is about entry to universities and A-level and copying masters. It's pathetic, absolutely pathetic. So not all, but the majority, of course. So the idea of giving a voice and a loose sort of a web of looseness that people can express, and you never know when it will happen. And it's so lovely to hear all that.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. And you make a lot of sense.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful. It was so great.